Hey guys, tonight we're going to witness what happens when a group of desperate refugees make a bet so insane that it accidentally creates one of history's most successful civilizations. Picture this, it's the year 421 AD, and you're watching the mighty Roman Empire crumble like a stale biscuit. Barbarian tribes are sweeping across Europe like Black Friday shoppers. Except instead of discounted electronics, they're after your land, your gold, and occasionally your life. Not exactly the retirement plan your ancestors had in mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the Italian mainland, watching smoke rise from what used to be your hometown. The Huns have just paid a visit, and let's just say they weren't interested in the local tourism board's recommendations. Your choices are delightfully simple: stay and become barbarian entertainment, or run toward what everyone agrees is the most inhospitable, disease-ridden, completely unsurvivable patch of wetland on the entire continent. Congratulations, you've just discovered the Venetian lagoon. Now, imagine trying to sell someone on this location today. Hey, want to buy some prime real estate? It's mostly underwater, smells like a fish died in a gym sock. The mosquitoes are basically flying syringes, and high tide means your living room becomes an indoor swimming pool. Oh, and the nearest solid ground is controlled by people who think human heads make excellent lawn decorations. But here's the thing about desperate people. They develop a remarkable talent for seeing opportunity where everyone else sees certain death. You wade into water that reaches your waist, carrying everything you own in a soggy bundle above your head. The smell hits you first, a cocktail of rotting seaweed, fish guts, and what you really hope is just mud, but suspect might be something far more human. The water is murky brown, the kind of brown that makes you question every life choice that led you to this moment. Your feet sink into soft muck with each step. Sometimes you hit solid ground, sometimes you don't, and sometimes what you thought was ground turns out to be the back of something that definitely doesn't appreciate being stepped on. Welcome to real estate shopping in the Dark Ages. But look around at your fellow refugees. These aren't random peasants who stumbled into the swamp by accident. Many of them are Romans, actual Romans, with skills, knowledge, and most importantly, a deep understanding of how trade routes work. They're former merchants who know the price of silk in Constantinople, craftsmen who've worked with Byzantine gold, and nobles who've spent their entire lives learning how to make other people do what they want. And they're all looking at this godforsaken swamp and thinking the same thing. This is terrible, but it's also temporary. Here's what they figured out that everyone else missed. Geography isn't just about where you are. It's about where everyone else can't get to you. These scattered islands and mudflats might look like nature's cruel joke, but they're also completely unattackable by traditional armies. Try bringing cavalry across a lagoon or wheeling siege engines through knee-deep marsh water. Good luck with that. Plus, and this is the part that gets really interesting, they're sitting right in the middle of one of the most important trade routes in the ancient world. Ships traveling between the Byzantine Empire and Western Europe have to pass by these waters. It's like setting up a lemonade stand on the only road between two major cities. Except instead of lemonade, you're selling protection services and convenient docking facilities. The first shelters are pathetic. Imagine trying to build a house when your foundation keeps trying to float away. They drive wooden stakes into the mud, thousands upon thousands of them, creating platforms that might stay above water for more than a few hours at a time. It's like playing Minecraft in survival mode, except if you make a mistake, you actually die. But here's where it gets fascinating. Instead of trying to fight the water, they decide to work with it. They start building houses on stilts, creating networks of wooden walkways, and most importantly, they begin to think of water not as an obstacle, but as a highway. While everyone else on the mainland is dealing with bandits, collapsed bridges, and roads that haven't been maintained since the last competent emperor died, these swamp dwellers are developing the fastest, safest transportation network in the region. A small boat can carry as much cargo as a dozen pack animals, and pirates can't exactly set up roadblocks in the middle of a lagoon. The first generation probably thought they were just buying time, surviving long enough for things to calm down so they could return to normal civilization. But their children are growing up thinking of water as home. They're learning to read tide patterns, the way mainland kids learn to read weather. They're developing an intuitive understanding of currents, seasonal changes, and most importantly, how to turn natural obstacles into competitive advantages. It's the kind of generational mindset shift that accidentally creates empires. By the time these kids are adults, they're not thinking about going back to the mainland. Why would they? The mainland has armies trampling through it every few years, destroying everything people try to build. But here in the lagoon, they're creating something that's not just safe, it's starting to become profitable. And that profit isn't coming from farming or mining, or any of the traditional ways people make money. It's coming from the fact that they've positioned themselves as the essential middleman in a trade route that connects the richest empire in the world with the hungriest markets in Europe. They're not just surviving in their swamp anymore. They're becoming indispensable. But this is still just the beginning of their story, because what happens next isn't just about clever real estate choices or lucky geography. What happens next is about a group of people who decide that if they're going to live surrounded by water, they might as well own all of it. Your children have grown up thinking water is a highway, and now they're about to turn that highway into their personal toll road. Except this isn't your typical roadside extortion. This is organized crime with a business plan so brilliant that it accidentally becomes legitimate international law. It's 697 AD, and you're standing on a wooden dock that your grandfather built with his bare hands and sheer desperation. The morning mist is lifting off the lagoon, revealing dozens of sleek boats that look nothing like the clumsy vessels your neighbors use. These are built for speed, maneuverability, and most importantly, for carrying things that other people really don't want you to have. Your boat captain. Let's call him Marco, because half the men in Venice are named Marco, leans against the mast with the casual confidence of someone who's never met a Byzantine merchant ship he couldn't outrun. He's explaining today's mission with the enthusiasm of a tour guide and the moral flexibility of a used car salesman. See that fat merchant vessel heading toward Ravenna? Marco points to a heavily loaded ship struggling against the current. That's basically a floating treasury. Silk, spices, gold, ivory, everything the Byzantine Empire produces and Western Europe desperately wants. And look how slowly it's moving. Here's the beautiful part. You're not technically pirates. Pirates are criminals who steal from innocent merchants. You're providing protection services and navigation assistance. to vessels passing through your territorial waters. It's completely different. The fact that ships, which refuse your services, tend to experience unfortunate accidents involving sudden holes in their hulls is purely coincidental. The legal framework is genius in its simplicity. The Byzantine Empire technically owns these trade routes, but they're too busy fighting wars on 3 different fronts to actually patrol them. The Western European kingdoms would love to control Mediterranean trade, but their ships are about as seaworthy as floating coffins. This creates what business schools would later call a power vacuum in the supply chain management sector. You fill that vacuum with entrepreneurial spirit and flexible ethics. Your boats surround the merchant vessel like wolves circling a wounded deer, except these wolves are offering to help carry your groceries. For a reasonable fee, of course. The Byzantine captain knows the drill. He can either pay the Venetian transit tax, or he can try to explain to his emperor why a shipload of precious cargo ended up at the bottom of the Adriatic. Most choose the tax. But here's where it gets really sophisticated-y. You don't just rob people and disappear. That's amateur hour. Instead, you offer them something genuinely valuable in return. Safe passage, yes, but also market intelligence, currency exchange, temporary storage facilities, and even insurance against future losses. You're not just taking their money, you're providing services they actually need. It's the medieval equivalent of Netflix. Sure, you could try to watch movies for free, but Netflix makes it so convenient that you're happy to pay the subscription fee. Except in this case, the alternative to subscribing is drowning. The real breakthrough comes when you realize that controlling individual ships is small-time thinking. Why extort one merchant at a time when you can control entire trade routes? You start establishing permanent bases at strategic choke points, small islands where ships have to pass close to shore, narrow channels where there's only one navigable path, harbors where vessels need to stop for repairs or supplies. Each base becomes a combination of fortress, customs house, and very polite robbery operation. Ships approaching Venetian waters know they're entering a zone where certain rules apply. They'll pay certain fees, follow certain procedures, and accept certain limitations on their cargo. In exchange, they get protection from actual pirates, guaranteed safe passage, and access to the most efficient trading network in the Mediterranean. You're not just stealing from the Byzantine Empire, you're replacing it. The genius part is that you make this system so profitable for everyone involved that resistance becomes economically irrational. A merchant who pays Venetian fees might lose 10% of his profits, but a merchant who tries to avoid Venice loses 100% of his profits when his ship gets lost at sea. Simple math. Your boats develop a distinctive look that strikes fear into the hearts of tax evaders and joy into the hearts of legitimate customers. Long, narrow hulls built for speed. Triangular sails that can catch wind from any direction. And most importantly, crews who can switch from friendly customer service representatives to efficient maritime enforcement officers in about 3 seconds. The psychological warfare is particularly sophisticated. Your sailors don't look like typical pirates. No eye patches or skull flags. Instead, they're impeccably dressed, almost military in their precision, speaking multiple languages and carrying official-looking documents. When they board a foreign vessel, they don't ransack it like barbarians. They conduct themselves like customs officials, complete with detailed paperwork and polite apologies for any inconvenience. It's terrifying precisely because it's so civilized. Byzantine merchants start requesting Venetian escorts for their voyages, not because they're forced to, but because Venetian protection actually works. Pirates avoid ships flying Venetian flags, knowing that attacking Venice's clients brings swift and creative retaliation. Weather damage gets repaired at Venetian facilities. Crew members who fall sick receive treatment at Venetian hospitals. You've accidentally invented the protection racket, but you've also invented the world's first multinational shipping corporation. The profits are staggering. Venice goes from a collection of muddy refugee camps to the wealthiest city in Europe in less than 2 generations. Gold flows in faster than you can count it. Exotic goods from Asia pile up in warehouses that your grandfathers couldn't have imagined. Young Venetian men who might have spent their lives as subsistence fishermen are now captaining fleets that carry treasures between empires. But money is just the beginning. What you're really accumulating is something far more valuable: information. Every ship that passes through your network carries news, rumors, intelligence about political developments, military movements, economic opportunities. You know about wars before the armies do. You hear about famines before the prices change. You learn about new trade routes before your competitors even know they exist. Knowledge becomes your ultimate weapon, and you're about to use it to pull off the greatest political con job in medieval history. You've successfully turned piracy into a respectable business model, but now you face the kind of problem that would make modern CEOs break out in cold sweats. You're too successful, and everyone wants to be in charge. It's 726 AD, and Venice has evolved from a collection of desperate refugees into the most profitable criminal enterprise in the Mediterranean. The problem is, when your company controls billions in medieval currency and has a private navy that could challenge empires, someone needs to be officially in charge. But here's the catch. Everyone who's gotten you this far is way too smart to let any one person become an all-powerful dictator. You're sitting in what passes for a council meeting, which looks like a cross between a corporate boardroom and a medieval war council. Around you are the most dangerous men in Europe, merchants who've outmaneuvered Byzantine bureaucrats, sea captains who've turned extortion into an art form, and traders who know where every empire keeps its gold reserves. And they're all staring at each other with the suspicious affection of siblings who've just inherited the family business. The obvious solution would be to crown someone king and call it a day. That's how every other successful civilization has handled the who's in charge question. But you've all spent too much time around absolute monarchs to think that's a good idea. You've seen what happens when one person gets too much power. They start making decisions based on personal whims instead of profitable logic. They develop expensive hobbies like building monuments to themselves. And worst of all, they begin to believe their own propaganda. So instead, you decide to create something that's never been tried before. A leadership position that's simultaneously the most powerful job in the world and the most constrained. Enter the Doge, a title that sounds vaguely ridiculous and is absolutely perfect for your purposes. It's derived from the Latin dux, meaning leader, but it's deliberately chosen to sound nothing like rex, king, or imperator, sir emperor. This isn't an accident. You're creating a job that everyone will want but no one can abuse. The selection process alone is a masterpiece of paranoid genius. Forget simple elections, those can be bought. Forget hereditary succession, that creates dynasties. Instead, you design a system so complicated that it would make modern election lawyers weep with envy. First, the Great Council, which is basically all the important families in Venice, elects 30 members by lot. Then those 30 elect 9 members, who elect 40 members, who elect 12 members, who elect 25 members, who finally elect the actual Doge. It's like a political version of Russian nesting dolls, except each layer is designed to prevent the previous layer from gaming the system. The beauty is that by the time you get to the final vote, no one can predict or control the outcome. You might be the richest man in Venice, but you can't buy your way to the Doge's palace because you don't know who's going to be making the final decision until the day it happens. But here's where it gets really clever. Winning the election is just the beginning of your problems. The Doge gets to live in a palace that makes Byzantine emperors jealous, wear robes that cost more than most people's houses, and command a fleet that could conquer half of Europe. In exchange, he agrees to a set of restrictions that would make a medieval monk's vows look permissive. You can't leave Venice without permission from the council. You can't meet with foreign ambassadors alone. You can't make any major decisions without consulting multiple committees. Your mail is read before you see it. Your spending is monitored down to the last gold coin. And just to make sure you don't get too comfortable, every decision you make has to be approved by at least 3 different groups of people who have every incentive to disagree with you. It's like being elected to the world's most luxurious prison, where you're simultaneously the warden and the most important prisoner. The psychological brilliance is that this system attracts exactly the right kind of person for the job. Anyone who wants to be Doge for the power trip gets discouraged by the restrictions. Anyone who wants it for the money realizes they could make more as a private merchant. The only people who actually seek the position are those who genuinely believe they can serve Venice's interests better than anyone else. And even they can't do much damage because the system won't let them. Compare this to how other medieval rulers operated. Your average king could decide to invade a neighboring country because he felt insulted at a dinner party. He could bankrupt his kingdom building a castle to impress his mistress. He could start a war because he had a prophetic dream involving a talking goat. But the Doge of Venice, he can't even order lunch without someone checking to make sure it's in the city's best interests. The office comes with ceremonial powers that look impressive to foreign visitors, but are basically meaningless in practice. The Doge gets to wear a funny hat, the iconic ducal cap that becomes a symbol of Venetian power, sit on a throne that's worth more than most countries' annual budgets, and receive ambassadors in a throne room designed to intimidate visiting emperors. But when it comes to actual decision making, he's essentially a very well-dressed committee chairman. Every important choice gets made by groups of merchants and nobles who understand that their personal wealth depends on Venice's continued success. The Doge might get the credit when things go well, but he also gets the blame when they go badly, and he can be removed from office if enough people decide he's not performing adequately. It's democracy disguised as monarchy, designed by people who understood that the appearance of absolute power is often more useful than actual absolute power. The system works so well that Venice will use variations of it for over 1,000 years. While other European cities are dealing with civil wars, succession crises, and rulers who think divine right means they can ignore economic reality, Venice just keeps getting richer and more powerful under a leadership structure that turns governance into a profitable team sport. But the real genius isn't in the politics. It's in what this political system allows Venice to do on the international stage. Because when you have a leader who can't make impulsive decisions, who's accountable to people who understand money, and who represents a state that treats foreign policy like a business negotiation, you can pull off diplomatic maneuvers that would be impossible for traditional kingdoms. And Venice is about to use that advantage to hijack the most expensive religious expedition in medieval history. Your perfect political system has a small problem. It's run by human beings, and human beings have an unfortunate tendency to want more power, more money, and more opportunities to make their enemies suffer in creative ways. Welcome to the real Venice, the one behind the marble facades and golden mosaics, where patrician families play a game so vicious that it makes modern corporate politics look like a kindergarten tea party. It's 1172, and you're attending what the invitation calls a social gathering at the Palazzo Dandolo. In reality, you're watching the most powerful families in Venice engage in psychological warfare disguised as polite conversation. The women glide across marble floors in silk gowns that cost more than entire villages, while the men discuss trade routes with the casual intensity of generals planning military campaigns. Everyone is wearing masks, not because it's carnival season, but because showing your real face at a Venetian political gathering is about as wise as swimming with sharks while bleeding. The masks aren't just fashion statements. They're practical necessities for people whose survival depends on their ability to smile at someone they're planning to destroy. The Doge might be the official leader, but real power in Venice flows through family networks that make the Corleones look like amateur hour. These aren't just rich merchants. They're dynasties that have been accumulating wealth, influence, and carefully nurtured grudges for generations. They remember every slight, every broken business deal, every marriage alliance that didn't work out exactly as planned. And they're all trapped in the same small city, forced to work together despite hating each other's guts. The evening's entertainment begins with Enrico Dandolo, not yet the legendary Doge, who will hijack the Fourth Crusade, but already displaying the family talent for turning every conversation into a strategic advantage. He's discussing the silk trade with Giovanni Mocenigo, and if you listen carefully, you can hear the subtext beneath their polite words. The Byzantine silk has been particularly fine this season, Enrico remarks, sipping wine that probably costs more than most people's annual income. Translation: I know you've been trying to cut me out of the Constantinople route, you scheming bastard. Indeed, Giovanni replies with a smile that could cut glass. Though I hear the quality control has been inconsistent lately. Translation: your last shipment was garbage, and everyone knows it. Your reputation is slipping. Perhaps we should discuss new quality assurance measures, Enrico suggests, his tone as smooth as poisoned honey. Translation: let's meet privately, so I can explain exactly how I'm going to ruin you. This is how Venetian politics works, through conversations that sound like business negotiations, but are actually elaborate death threats. These men have learned to weaponize courtesy, turning every social interaction into an opportunity to gather intelligence, form alliances, and identify enemies. The women are even more dangerous, partly because everyone underestimates them, and partly because they've had centuries to perfect the art of destroying people while appearing completely innocent. Caterina Contarini is currently discussing needlework with Elisabetta Morosini, which means they're probably planning to bankrupt each other's husbands through a series of strategic marriage alliances and trade manipulations that won't bear fruit for another decade. But here's the truly diabolical part: this system of controlled hostility actually makes Venice stronger. Because when your political elite is constantly trying to outmaneuver each other, they develop an almost supernatural awareness of threats and opportunities. They can't afford to be complacent or stupid, because their enemies are watching for any sign of weakness. It's like natural selection, but for political cunning. The competition forces innovation. If the Dandolo family discovers a new trade route, the Mocenegos have to find an even better one or risk becoming irrelevant. If the Contarines develop a new banking technique, every other family has to adapt or get left behind. The constant pressure to stay ahead of your rivals accidentally creates a state that's always at the cutting edge of commercial and political innovation. The violence, when it comes, is surgical in its precision. Venetians don't burn down each other's palaces or stage dramatic public assassinations. That would be bad for business. Instead, they destroy each other through methods that economists would later call market manipulation, and lawyers would call technically legal but morally questionable. A rival family's ship might experience an unfortunate accident due to navigational errors that just happened to occur near rocks that everyone knew were there. A promising young merchant might find himself excluded from profitable ventures due to concerns about his creditworthiness that mysteriously appeared right after he offended the wrong person. A political alliance might collapse due to irreconcilable differences that somehow always benefit the family that orchestrated the breakdown. It's murder by bureaucracy, assassination through accounting. The beauty of this system is that it channels all the destructive energy that would normally tear a state apart and redirects it toward making Venice more competitive against external rivals. When Venetian families are plotting against each other, they're also developing skills and resources that can be used against foreign enemies. When they're trying to bankrupt their domestic rivals, they're also creating the financial instruments and trade networks that will make Venice the economic superpower of the Mediterranean. Your enemies aren't just obstacles to overcome. They're unwitting partners in a collaborative effort to make everyone more dangerous and effective. The masquerade ball continues around you, a carefully choreographed dance of alliance and betrayal. By the end of the evening, 3 new business partnerships will be formed, 2 existing ones will be quietly dissolved, and at least one family will discover that their most trusted allies have been selling their secrets to their worst enemies. And tomorrow, they'll all meet again at the Ducal Palace to vote on policies that will affect the entire Venetian state. They'll put aside their personal vendettas long enough to focus on the bigger prize, expanding Venetian power and wealth. Because as much as they hate each other, they hate the idea of Venice losing its dominance even more. The masks come off at midnight, revealing faces that have learned to smile while calculating exactly how much it would cost to have someone quietly disappeared. These are people who understand that in politics, as in business, sentiment is a luxury that only losers can afford. But their internal warfare is about to be interrupted by an opportunity that's too big for any single family to handle alone. The Pope is planning another crusade, and he's looking for transportation. Venice is about to discover that sometimes the best way to stop fighting each other is to find someone else to rob. Your family feuds are about to take a backseat to the greatest business opportunity in medieval history. The Pope has just announced another holy war, and every ambitious Venetian can practically hear the sound of gold coins raining from heaven. It's a 202, and Enrico Dandolo, now the 90-year-old Doge of Venice, and quite possibly the most dangerous blind man in Europe, is sitting across from the leaders of the Fourth Crusade. These French and Flemish nobles have marched into Venice, expecting to negotiate a simple transportation contract. What they don't realize is that they've just walked into a meeting with the medieval equivalent of a corporate shark who's spent decades perfecting the art of turning other people's religious enthusiasm into Venetian profit. The Crusaders need ships, lots of ships. Enough ships to transport 33 500 warriors, 4 500 horses, and supplies for a year-long campaign to the Holy Land. It's the kind of logistical nightmare that would make modern military planners reach for the antacids. But for Venice, it's Christmas morning. Dandolo listens to their requirements with the patient attention of a grandfather, hearing his grandchildren's Christmas wish lists. Except this grandfather has spent his entire life turning impossible requests into profitable contracts. And these particular grandchildren are about to learn why you never negotiate with someone who's been playing this game longer than you've been alive. Gentlemen, Dandolo begins, his voice carrying the kind of calm authority that comes from having bankrupted emperors. What you're asking for will require the complete mobilization of Venetian maritime resources. Every shipyard in the city, every carpenter, every sailor. For 1 full year, Venice will essentially become your personal navy. The Crusade leaders nod eagerly. This sounds exactly like what they want to hear. The cost, Dandolo continues with the timing of a master comedian, will be 85,000 silver marks. To put this in perspective, that's roughly equivalent to asking for the annual GDP of a medium-sized kingdom. It's the kind of number that makes grown men reconsider their life choices. But Dandolo isn't finished. Plus, he adds with the casual tone of someone ordering an extra side of fries. Half of all territorial conquests made during the expedition. This is where the negotiation becomes pure art. The Crusaders came expecting to hire a taxi service to the Holy Land. Instead, they're being offered a full-service invasion package, complete with financing, logistics, military support, and a business partner who expects to share in the profits. It's like calling an Uber and having the driver offer to help you rob a bank. The genius of Dandolo's proposal isn't just the price, it's the structure. By demanding half of all conquests, Venice transforms from a service provider into a stakeholder. They're not just getting paid to transport crusaders, they're becoming partners in a holy war that they can steer toward the most profitable targets. And here's the beautiful part. When the Crusaders inevitably can't pay the full amount, which Dandolo absolutely knows they can't, Venice will be in the perfect position to suggest alternative payment methods. Methods that just happen to align with Venetian strategic interests. The payment crisis arrives right on schedule. The Crusaders managed to raise about 50,000 marks. Impressive, but nowhere near the agreed amount. They're sitting in Venice, surrounded by the most powerful fleet in the Mediterranean, owing money they don't have to people who specialize in creative debt collection. Dandolo, displaying the kind of generous flexibility that would make modern loan sharks weep with admiration, offers a solution. Venice will defer the debt payment in exchange for a small favor. The crusading army just needs to make a tiny detour on their way to the Holy Land to help Venice resolve a minor business dispute with the city of Zara. Zara, you see, has been interfering with Venetian trade routes and refusing to pay proper tribute. It's the kind of problem that Venice could solve with their own forces. But why use your own soldiers when you can borrow a crusading army that's already been blessed by the Pope? The Crusaders are horrified. They signed up to fight Muslims in the Holy Land, not Christians in the Balkans. But they're also broke, stranded, and completely dependent on Venetian goodwill. It's like finding yourself in a foreign country with no money, no phone, and only one person offering to help. And that person wants you to do them a small favor. First, the siege of Zara is a masterclass in efficient problem solving. The crusading army, motivated by their desire to get out of debt and reach the Holy Land, conquers the city in 5 days. Venice gets control of a key strategic port, elimination of a commercial rival, and a crusading army that's now comfortable with the idea of attacking Christian cities when it serves their interests. But Dandolo isn't finished. Having successfully turned the Fourth Crusade into a Venetian debt collection service, he now proposes an even more ambitious detour. There's another small matter that needs attention: the political situation in Constantinople. The Byzantine Empire, Venice's oldest and most complicated business partner, is experiencing some internal difficulties. The rightful emperor has been overthrown by a usurper, and the legitimate heir is asking for help. Surely the Crusaders, being men of honor and justice, would want to help restore the rightful ruler to his throne. Also, the grateful emperor would certainly reward his liberators with enough gold to pay off their debts to Venice and fund their expedition to the Holy Land. It's a win-win situation for everyone involved. What Dandolo doesn't mention is that Venice has been looking for an excuse to eliminate Byzantine competition in Eastern Mediterranean trade for decades. The political crisis in Constantinople is like finding your biggest business rival going through a messy divorce. An opportunity too good to pass up. The Crusaders, by now thoroughly accustomed to Venetian logic, agree to this additional detour. They've already violated their original mission once. What's one more stop along the way? The result is the sack of Constantinople in 1204, one of the most profitable city conquests in medieval history. The crusading army gets enough loot to make their wildest dreams seem modest. The restored Byzantine emperor gets a throne that comes with significantly reduced actual power, and Venice gets control of 3/8 of the Byzantine Empire, including the best harbors, the most profitable trade routes, and enough strategic positions to dominate Eastern Mediterranean commerce for the next 2 centuries. Oh, and the Crusaders. They never do make it to the Holy Land. Somehow, after all these profitable detours, they've lost interest in the original mission. Dandolo has just pulled off the greatest bait and switch in military history. He advertised a taxi service to Jerusalem and delivered a guided tour of conquest that transforms Venice from a powerful city-state into a commercial empire stretching from Italy to the Black Sea. But the real masterpiece isn't the territorial gains. It's the precedent. Venice has just demonstrated that religious wars can be turned into business opportunities. That moral authority can be leveraged for commercial advantage, and that the right partnership agreement can transform other people's dreams into your own profits. It's a lesson they'll remember when the next great opportunity presents itself. Because in Venice, every crisis is just a business opportunity wearing a disguise. Your commercial empire is growing faster than your ability to control it, and you're about to discover that when you own half the Mediterranean, everyone wants to know your secrets. And everyone has secrets worth stealing. It's 12:20, and you're walking through the Piazza San Marco on what appears to be a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. Merchants are hawking exotic spices from lands most Europeans can't pronounce. Nobles are discussing trade agreements with the casual intensity of people who understand that a single contract can make or break kingdoms. Tourists, yes, medieval Venice has tourists, are gawking at the golden mosaics like modern visitors photographing the Sistine Chapel. But if you know what to look for, you'll notice something else entirely. That silk merchant carefully listening to conversations isn't just interested in fashion trends. He's memorizing names, routes, and cargo manifests. The priest blessing travelers isn't just concerned for their spiritual welfare. He's noting who's leaving the city, when they're departing, and where they claim to be going. Even the prostitute flirting with that Byzantine diplomat isn't just interested in his money. She's being paid far more to discover what he knows about Constantinople's grain reserves. Welcome to Venice, where literally everyone is a spy, and trust is a luxury that only the dead can afford. The transformation happened gradually, the way most brilliant innovations do. After the Fourth Crusade windfall, Venice suddenly found itself managing an empire that stretched from the Italian coast to the Black Sea. They had trading posts in places they'd never heard of, business partners they'd never met, and competitors who would happily murder them if given the opportunity. Traditional empires handle this problem with armies. Lots of armies, stationed everywhere, costing enormous amounts of money and creating enormous amounts of resentment. But Venice has developed something far more cost-effective and infinitely more terrifying: a city where information flows like water, and everyone contributes to the collection system whether they know it or not. The Council of Ten officially oversees Venice's intelligence operations, but calling them the intelligence service is like calling the ocean a swimming pool. These aren't just government spies. They're the coordinators of a surveillance network that makes modern social media companies look like amateur data collectors. Here's how it works. Every Venetian citizen, from the richest patrician to the poorest dock worker, is both a potential source of information and a potential target of surveillance. Not because they're all criminals or traitors, but because Venice has realized that in a commercial empire, information is more valuable than gold, and infinitely more dangerous in the wrong hands. Your gondolier isn't just paddling you through the canals for transportation. He's noting which palazzos you visit, how long you stay, and whether you seem nervous or confident when you leave. The servant who brings your wine at dinner isn't just concerned with your dining experience. She's listening to every word of your conversation and will report anything interesting to her handler before sunrise. Even your confessor might be working for the state. Nothing quite undermines the seal of confession like the knowledge that your priest has been instructed to pay special attention to sins involving treason, tax evasion, or unauthorized communication with foreign powers. The psychological impact is absolutely devastating. In most medieval cities, people worry about thieves, plague, or invading armies. External threats that you can see coming. But in Venice, the greatest danger comes from the people closest to you. Your business partner might be reporting your trade secrets to the council. Your mistress might be asking very specific questions about your family's finances. Your own children might be inadvertently revealing sensitive information during their daily lessons. Paranoia becomes a survival skill, but paradoxically, this makes Venetians better at their jobs. When you know that everyone is watching you, you become extraordinarily careful about your work, your speech, and your associations. When you assume that every conversation might be reported to someone in authority, you develop remarkable precision in your language. When you understand that your reputation depends on information that others are actively trying to gather, you become obsessive about controlling your own narrative. The system creates a feedback loop of excellence. Mediocre merchants don't survive in an environment where their every mistake gets documented and analyzed. Incompetent diplomats can't function when their negotiating strategies are being dissected by teams of intelligence analysts. Corrupt officials find themselves exposed before they can cause serious damage to the state. It's quality control through universal surveillance. The foreign intelligence operations are even more sophisticated. Venice maintains permanent commercial representatives in every major city from London to Cairo, and these representatives do far more than facilitate trade agreements. They're data collection centers equipped with teams of analysts who specialize in understanding local politics, economic conditions, military capabilities, and social trends. A Venetian merchant in Paris isn't just selling silk and buying wool. He's gathering intelligence about French royal finances, noting which nobles seem dissatisfied with the current regime, and identifying potential allies or enemies in future conflicts. A Venetian banker in Constantinople isn't just managing currency exchanges. He's tracking Byzantine military spending, analyzing shifts in imperial policy, and cultivating relationships with officials who might be useful in various scenarios. The intelligence network gives Venice supernatural awareness of opportunities and threats. They know about wars before armies mobilize, about famines before crops fail, about political upheavals before the participants realize they're unhappy. This advanced knowledge translates directly into commercial advantage. You can corner markets, avoid dangerous investments, and position yourself to profit from other people's misfortunes. But the real masterpiece is how Venice uses this information. Most intelligence services focus on preventing threats or gaining military advantages. Venice uses their spy network primarily to make money, lots of money, in increasingly creative ways. When their agents report that England is planning a new tax on wool exports, Venetian merchants quietly buy up wool futures before the announcement drives prices through the roof. When they learn that a plague outbreak is developing in Egypt, they immediately redirect grain shipments to take advantage of the coming food shortage. When they discover that a rival trading city is experiencing internal political problems, they swoop in to steal clients and establish themselves as the reliable alternative. It's insider trading on a civilizational scale. The most disturbing part isn't the surveillance itself, it's how normal it becomes. Venice has created a society where being watched is so universal that people stop noticing it. Children grow up assuming that adults are always listening to conversations that seem private. Young merchants learn to conduct business as if every transaction might be scrutinized by competitors. Diplomats develop the habit of assuming that their correspondence will be read by multiple intelligence services before reaching its intended recipient. Privacy becomes a concept that exists only in theory, like unicorns or honest politicians. But this total surveillance state has a weakness that Venice hasn't anticipated. When everyone is watching everyone else, and when information flows through networks that no individual can fully control, secrets have a way of multiplying and mutating in unexpected directions. The same system that makes Venice incredibly effective at gathering intelligence about external threats also makes it vulnerable to internal information warfare. And some of the most dangerous secrets aren't about foreign enemies. They're about what Venetian leaders are doing to their own people. Your perfect surveillance network has just detected the most terrifying intelligence report in Venetian history. There's a new player in the Mediterranean, and they're not interested in negotiating trade agreements. They want to own everything, starting with you. It's 1453, and the sound echoing across the Bosphorus isn't thunder. It's the death knell of the Byzantine Empire, courtesy of Ottoman cannons that can punch holes through walls that have stood for 1,000 years. Constantinople, your oldest and most profitable business partner, has just become Istanbul, property of Sultan Mehmed II, a 21-year-old conqueror who treats warfare like a particularly violent form of urban renewal. You're standing in the ducal palace, watching Doge Francesco Foscari try to process intelligence reports that read like an apocalyptic fan fiction. The Ottomans aren't just another regional power looking to muscle in on Mediterranean trade. They're a military, industrial complex with a holy war mandate, and an engineering department that treats siege warfare like a creative writing exercise. The numbers are genuinely frightening. While Venice has been perfecting the art of making money through elaborate commercial schemes, the Ottoman Empire has been perfecting the art of making everything explode through increasingly large cannons. They have artillery that can level fortifications, a navy that grows stronger every year, and most terrifyingly, a sultan who thinks compromise is what you do with people after you've conquered them. Traditional military wisdom suggests that Venice should start building bigger walls, training more soldiers, and preparing for a glorious last stand that will be remembered in epic poems. But Venice didn't become the dominant Mediterranean power by following traditional military wisdom. They did it by turning every crisis into a business opportunity. The War Council meeting looks like a corporate board meeting where someone has just announced that their biggest competitor has acquired nuclear weapons and a very bad attitude. Around the table sit men who've spent their entire careers thinking of warfare as an extension of commerce, and they're about to discover whether commercial principles work when your opponent's negotiating strategy involves cannonballs. Doge Foscari, displaying the kind of calm that comes from having survived decades of Venetian politics, poses the key question. Gentlemen, how do we fight an empire that has more soldiers than we have citizens, more ships than we have harbors, and more cannons than we have buildings? The answer, when it comes, is pure Venetian genius. We don't fight them. We make fighting us unprofitable. This isn't cowardice. It's the strategic application of cost-benefit analysis to military conflict. Venice recognizes that they can't match Ottoman military power directly, but they can make conquest so expensive and complicated that even victory becomes a form of defeat. The strategy unfolds like a masterpiece of defensive game theory. Instead of trying to hold fixed positions that the Ottomans can besiege with their superior artillery, Venice adopts a fluid defense based on their natural advantages: superior naval mobility, better intelligence networks, and an economy that can finance prolonged irregular warfare. Venetian fleets don't engage Ottoman ships in direct naval battles. They appear, strike at vulnerable supply lines, and disappear before the enemy can respond. It's guerrilla warfare at sea, conducted by merchants who understand that the most effective way to hurt an empire is to make their expansion economically unsustainable. The psychological warfare is particularly sophisticated. Venice uses their intelligence network to spread carefully crafted rumors about Ottoman weaknesses, internal disputes, and military failures. They fund rebels in Ottoman territories, not because they care about liberation movements, but because rebellions are expensive to suppress and distract resources from offensive operations. Most importantly, they turn their commercial relationships into military assets. Every Venetian trading post becomes a potential intelligence center. Every business partner becomes a source of information about Ottoman movements and intentions. Every commercial transaction becomes an opportunity to gather strategic intelligence or plant disinformation. The siege of Negroponte in 1470 demonstrates Venetian adaptive strategy in action. The city is clearly doomed. Ottoman forces outnumber the defenders by absurd margins, and their artillery makes the city's medieval walls look like decorative suggestions. Traditional military doctrine would demand a heroic last stand followed by glorious martyrdom. Instead, Venice negotiates. Not surrender, negotiation. They offer to trade the city for commercial concessions elsewhere, to pay tribute in exchange for autonomous status, to provide the Ottomans with valuable intelligence about other enemies in exchange for favorable treatment. When the Ottomans reject these offers, and take the city by force. Venice doesn't mourn the loss. They study it. Every detail of the siege becomes intelligence about Ottoman capabilities and tactics. The fall of Negropont isn't a defeat. It's expensive market research about how their enemy operates. The lesson shapes Venetians' strategy for the next century. Never fight battles you can't win, but make sure every battle your enemy wins costs them more than they expected to pay. The Ottoman-Venetian wars become a masterclass in asymmetric conflict. The Ottomans have overwhelming military superiority, but Venice has economic resilience and strategic flexibility. It's like watching a heavyweight boxer fight a ballet dancer. Except the ballet dancer keeps hitting the boxer in the wallet while pirouetting away from his punches. The peace treaties are works of art in their own right. Venice negotiates agreements that look like surrender documents but function like business contracts. They agree to pay tribute to the Sultan, but the tribute payments come with trade privileges that more than compensate for the cost. They acknowledge Ottoman supremacy in theoretical terms while maintaining practical independence in commercial operations. It's the diplomatic equivalent of agreeing to pay protection money to the mafia, but structuring the payments so that you end up making money from the arrangement. The most brilliant innovation is how Venice turns military weakness into commercial advantage. Because they can't match Ottoman military power, they position themselves as the indispensable intermediary between the Islamic world and Christian Europe. They become the merchants that both sides need, the diplomats that both sides trust, and the intelligence brokers that both sides secretly employ. Ottoman merchants need Venetian expertise to navigate European markets. European princes need Venetian connections to understand Ottoman intentions. Both sides need Venetian financial services to manage the complex currency exchanges required for international trade. Venice transforms from being a military threat that needs to be eliminated into being a commercial resource that's too valuable to destroy. The strategy works so well that by 1500, Venice has survived the Ottoman expansion that eliminated dozens of other Christian powers. They're smaller than they used to be, less politically independent than they'd prefer, but they're still profitable, still influential, and still very much alive. But their success in adapting to the Ottoman threat has hidden a deeper vulnerability. While they've been focused on surviving the Islamic conquest of the Eastern Mediterranean, they've failed to notice that the real threat to Venetian supremacy isn't coming from the East. It's coming from the West, in the form of Portuguese ships carrying news that will make Ottoman cannons seem like a minor inconvenience. Your brilliant strategy of turning Ottoman cannons into a manageable business expense is about to be rendered completely irrelevant by something far more devastating than military conquest. Technological disruption on a global scale. It's 1498, and a Portuguese explorer named Vasco da Gama has just accomplished something that makes your centuries of Mediterranean dominance look like a regional novelty act. He's sailed around the southern tip of Africa and reached India directly, bypassing every single one of your carefully constructed trade monopolies in the process. You're sitting in a Venetian coffee house. Yes, Venice invented the coffee house, because of course they did, reading intelligence reports that sound like science fiction. Portuguese ships are returning to Lisbon loaded with spices that cost a fraction of what you've been paying for the same goods in Alexandria. They're selling pepper in European markets at prices that make your profit margins look like rounding errors. The waiter refilling your coffee doesn't realize he's witnessing the beginning of the end of an empire. Neither do the merchants at the next table, who are still discussing silk prices as if the fundamental structure of global commerce hasn't just been permanently altered by a handful of Portuguese sailors with better navigation equipment. This isn't like the Ottoman threat, which you could handle through clever diplomacy and strategic flexibility. This is an existential challenge to your entire business model. For 800 years, Venice has dominated Euro trade with Asia because geography made you the indispensable middleman. European merchants who wanted Asian goods had to buy them from you because there literally wasn't any other practical route. Now there is. The Portuguese haven't just discovered a new trade route. They've made your entire civilization obsolete. It's like being the world's most successful telegram company and then watching everyone switch to email. Except instead of adapting to new technology, you have to adapt to the fact that your geographical advantages have just been permanently neutralized by better maps and more seaworthy ships. The numbers are genuinely terrifying. Spices that cost 100 ducats in Venice now cost 20 ducats in Lisbon. The Portuguese can sell Asian goods in European markets at prices that undercut your costs. Not your profits, your actual costs. They're not just competing with you, they're proving that your entire economic system is a historical anachronism. Your first instinct is to treat this like every other commercial challenge you've faced, gather intelligence, identify weaknesses, and develop a strategy to turn the situation to your advantage. Venice dispatches agents to Lisbon, bribes Portuguese officials for information about their trade routes, and even attempts to sabotage their expeditions through creative applications of maritime accidents. But this isn't a problem that can be solved through superior espionage or political manipulation. The Portuguese have fundamentally altered the geography of global commerce, and no amount of Venetian cunning can put that genie back in the bottle. The Council of 10 meetings take on the atmosphere of corporate boardrooms during a hostile takeover. Everyone understands that they're facing an extinction-level event, but nobody knows how to respond to a threat that can't be negotiated with, bribed, or assassinated. You can't embargo the Atlantic Ocean. You can't manipulate Portuguese politics enough to shut down their exploration program. And you certainly can't compete with shipping costs that are determined by physics rather than politics. Venice tries everything. They attempt to establish their own Atlantic trading operations, but they're centuries behind the Portuguese and Spanish in ocean navigation technology. They try to improve their traditional Mediterranean routes by negotiating better terms with Ottoman and Mamluk authorities, but cost reductions of 10% can't compete with Portuguese savings of 80%. Most desperately, they attempt to sabotage Portuguese operations through diplomatic pressure, spreading rumors about the dangers of Atlantic navigation, and even financing pirates to attack Portuguese ships. But attacking the symptoms of technological change doesn't eliminate the underlying problem. Other people have learned to do your job better, cheaper, and faster. It's like watching a master craftsman try to compete with a factory assembly line. The craftsmanship might be superior, but the economics are brutal and unyielding. The psychological impact on Venetian society is devastating. For generations, every Venetian child grew up knowing that their city was the center of the commercial world, that their future prosperity was guaranteed by geography and tradition. Now they're watching their parents' businesses collapse, their family fortunes evaporate, and their entire way of life become economically unviable. The great merchant families that once competed to dominate global trade routes are now competing to avoid bankruptcy. Palace auctions become common as patrician families sell off centuries of accumulated wealth to pay debts they never expected to owe. Young men who expected to inherit commercial empires instead inherit legal obligations to creditors they've never met. The irony is brutal. Venice's very success at creating a sophisticated commercial system makes them more vulnerable to disruption, not less. They've built an entire civilization around maximizing the value of their geographic position, and when that position loses its strategic value, everything else becomes worthless very quickly. Compare this to less sophisticated economies that were more diversified. Naples survives the new trade routes because they were never entirely dependent on Asian commerce. Genoa adapts by shifting their focus to financial services and local Mediterranean trade. But Venice, precisely because they were so spectacularly successful at dominating one particular market, can't easily pivot to something else. It's the innovator's dilemma, centuries before anyone had a name for it. The most heartbreaking part isn't the economic decline. It's the gradual realization that this isn't a temporary setback that clever strategy can overcome. This is a permanent change in the fundamental structure of global commerce. The age of Mediterranean supremacy is ending, and the age of Atlantic exploration is beginning. Venice becomes a case study in how quickly historical advantages can become historical artifacts. A city that once dictated terms to emperors is now struggling to remain relevant in a world where the most important decisions are being made in Lisbon, Seville, and eventually London and Amsterdam. The traditional Venetian response to crisis, political maneuvering, commercial innovation, and diplomatic flexibility proves inadequate when the crisis is caused by technological and geographical changes that no amount of human cleverness can reverse. By 1550, Venice is still wealthy, still beautiful, still politically independent. But they're no longer the center of the commercial world. They've become a regional power in a global economy, a formerly great empire learning to live with reduced circumstances. But Venice has one final card to play, one last transformation that will let them survive even this ultimate disruption. Because when you can't be the world's most important commercial center anymore, you can still become something else entirely. Your 1,000-year experiment in commercial republic governance is about to face its final exam, administered by a Corsican artillery officer who treats ancient institutions the way most people treat outdated software. Something to be efficiently deleted and replaced with newer versions. It's 1797, and Napoleon Bonaparte is marching across northern Italy like a particularly violent software update, systematically shutting down medieval political systems that he considers incompatible with his vision of modern European efficiency. He's already eliminated the Duchy of Milan, reorganized the Papal States, and turned most of the Italian peninsula into a collection of client republics that exist primarily to fund his military ambitions. Now he's looking at Venice, and you can practically see him calculating whether your ancient republic is worth the administrative hassle of conquest, or if it would be simpler to just turn you into another footnote in his memoirs. You're standing in the Piazza San Marco on what everyone knows might be the last day of Venetian independence, watching tourists feed pigeons as if the world isn't about to fundamentally change. The irony isn't lost on you. After surviving Huns, Ottomans, plague epidemics, and the complete restructuring of global commerce, Venice might finally be eliminated by a man who views your entire civilization as a historical curiosity that's outlived its usefulness. The Doge, Lodovico Manin, is facing a decision that no Venetian leader has ever had to make: how to end a 1,000-year-old republic without completely destroying everything it represents. It's like being asked to gracefully shut down a family business that's been operating since before anyone invented the concept of family businesses. The military situation is farcically hopeless. Napoleon commands an army of 30,000 battle-hardened veterans who've spent the last 5 years perfecting the art of making European monarchies extinct. Venice has a ceremonial guard, some middle-aged merchants who occasionally play soldier on weekends, and a navy that's more suitable for trade protection than actual warfare. It's like being challenged to a duel by a professional gunfighter when your weapon of choice is a strongly worded letter. But Venice has something that Napoleon's other victims lacked: 8 centuries of experience in turning impossible situations into negotiating advantages. Even facing annihilation, Venetian leaders are approaching this crisis the way they've approached every other challenge, as a complex business transaction that requires careful analysis of costs, benefits, and long-term consequences. The Great Council meetings have the surreal quality of corporate board meetings where everyone knows the company is about to be dissolved, but they're still trying to maximize shareholder value in the liquidation process. These are people who've spent their entire lives treating politics as an extension of commerce, and they're determined to get the best possible deal even in surrender. The negotiation strategy is masterful in its acceptance of reality. Venice doesn't try to fight Napoleon militarily. That would be suicide. They don't try to form alliances with other Italian states. Napoleon has already demonstrated what happens to coalitions that oppose him. Instead, they offer him something he actually wants: a peaceful transition that saves him the time and expense of a siege, while providing him with a propaganda victory about the inevitable triumph of modern republican values over ancient aristocratic privileges. It's surrender disguised as ideological convergence. The terms are negotiated with the kind of attention to detail that would make modern merger and acquisition lawyers weep with admiration. Venice agrees to dissolve the Republic and transfer sovereignty to Napoleon's Italian client state system. In exchange, Napoleon guarantees the personal safety and property rights of Venetian citizens, promises to maintain Venice's commercial privileges, and agrees to preserve the city's artistic and cultural treasures. Most importantly, the transition will be conducted with appropriate ceremony and dignity. This isn't a conquest. It's a voluntary political evolution guided by Enlightenment principles and mutual respect between civilized parties. The propaganda value for Napoleon is enormous. Instead of being portrayed as a conqueror who destroyed an ancient republic, he becomes the liberator who helped Venice modernize its outdated political system. Instead of resistance that requires expensive military operations, he gets cooperation that demonstrates the inevitable appeal of his revolutionary ideals. The final session of the Great Council on May 12, 1797, is choreographed like a state funeral combined with a corporate shareholders' meeting. 500 years of Venetian patricians gather to vote themselves out of existence, conducting the most important business in their republic's history with the same procedural precision they've used for routine trade negotiations. The vote isn't even close. 5-12 in favor of dissolution, 20 opposed, 5 abstentions. It's the most unanimous decision in Venetian political history, achieved not through consensus about the desirability of the outcome, but through shared recognition that the alternatives are considerably worse. Doge Manin removes the ducal cap, the symbol of Venetian sovereignty that's been worn by 120 predecessors over nearly 11 centuries, and hands it to his secretary with words that summarize 800 years of political pragmatism. Take this, I shall have no further use for it. It's the most Venetian statement imaginable, practical, dignified, and focused on the efficient management of transitions rather than dramatic gestures of defiance. The ceremony concludes with the symbolic burning of the Golden Book, the registry of Venetian noble families that determined political participation in the Republic. Watching centuries of genealogical records turn to ash, you're witnessing the literal end of a social system that created one of history's most successful commercial civilizations. But even in dissolution, Venice maintains its characteristic attention to long-term consequences. The political republic might be ending, but the cultural, commercial, and social networks that made Venice successful will survive under new management. The palazzos will still house wealthy families. The merchants will continue trading with modified business models, and the artisans will keep creating beautiful objects for appreciative customers. The Republic dies, but the city adapts. Napoleon himself seems almost anticlimactic after the elegant precision of Venetian political theater. He arrives in Venice like a tourist who's accidentally stumbled into someone else's historical moment, clearly more interested in moving on to his next conquest than in savoring his victory over an ancient republic. He stays just long enough to loot some art treasures for French museums and reorganize the local government according to his standardized client state template. Then he's gone, leaving Venice to figure out how to maintain its essential character under a political system designed by someone who views local traditions as administrative inefficiencies. But as you watch French soldiers replacing Venetian guards at the Ducal Palace, you realize that Venice has just pulled off perhaps its greatest strategic achievement. They've managed to surrender in a way that preserves almost everything that actually matters about their civilization, while giving up only the political independence that was no longer sustainable anyway. It's the perfect Venetian ending, a victory disguised as a defeat, a transformation marketed as a conclusion. And like every other crisis in Venetian history, it's really just the beginning of the next chapter in an ongoing story about how intelligent people adapt to changing circumstances without losing their essential identity. The political republic is dead, but the survival code that kept it alive for a millennium is about to become the blueprint for how civilizations adapt to an age of permanent disruption. You're walking through Venice in 1850, 50 years after Napoleon's liberation, and something remarkable has happened. The city that was supposed to disappear into historical irrelevance has instead transformed itself into something entirely new. The world's first tourist destination designed around the monetization of its own past. This isn't just about showing off pretty buildings to wealthy visitors. It's about the systematic conversion of cultural heritage into economic assets. Venice has figured out how to turn nostalgia into a sustainable business model, making their very obsolescence a source of competitive advantage. The genius is breathtaking in its simplicity, since Venice can no longer compete as a commercial empire or political power. They've become something unprecedented, a living museum that generates revenue by allowing people to experience what a medieval city-state actually felt like. Visitors pay premium prices for the privilege of walking through streets where Marco Polo planned his expeditions, eating in restaurants built into former palazzos, and sleeping in hotels that were once the homes of merchants who negotiated with emperors. It's the ultimate Venetian business innovation, turning your own decline into a luxury experience. But the tourist industry is just the surface manifestation of something much more profound. Venice has discovered how to preserve its essential character while completely reinventing its economic foundation. The same families that once dominated global spice routes now dominate hospitality services. The same networks that once moved silk and gold now move people and experiences. The same intelligence systems that once tracked political developments across empires now track visitor preferences and market trends. The core competencies haven't changed. They've just found new applications. The palazzos along the Grand Canal tell the story of institutional continuity disguised as radical transformation. The Palazzo Dandolo, once home to the family that hijacked the Fourth Crusade, is now the Hotel Danieli, where European aristocrats pay enormous sums to sleep in rooms decorated with the profits of medieval commercial warfare. The Palazzo Mocenigo, former headquarters of a merchant dynasty that competed with kings, now houses a perfume museum where visitors learn about the historical spice trade that made such luxury possible. It's like watching a technology company pivot from hardware to software while maintaining the same corporate culture and management principles. The survival strategies that worked in the medieval Mediterranean turn out to be perfectly suited for the modern global economy. Venice's traditional emphasis on information networks becomes the foundation for modern tourism marketing. Their historic skill at cultural adaptation helps them cater to visitors from dozens of different countries and backgrounds. Their centuries of experience in managing scarcity of land, resources, and political independence translates directly into the luxury hospitality business model. Most importantly, their institutional memory of surviving existential threats makes them remarkably resilient in the face of modern challenges. When railroad connections threaten their isolation, they turn train stations into grand architectural statements that enhance the visitor experience. When modern hotels compete with traditional accommodations, they emphasize their authentic historical character as a premium differentiator. Every crisis becomes a rebranding opportunity. By 1900, Venice has established the template that successful cities will follow for the next century: economic diversification through cultural commodification, strategic positioning as a unique experience rather than a generic service provider, and the systematic cultivation of competitive advantages that can't be easily replicated by rivals. Singapore, Hong Kong, and Monaco will all use variations of the Venetian model: small city, states that leverage geographic advantages, cultural distinctiveness, and institutional flexibility to compete successfully against much larger rivals. The basic formula remains the same: find something you can do better than anyone else. Create systems that reinforce that advantage and adapt continuously while maintaining your core identity. But Venice's influence extends far beyond urban planning and tourism development. The governance innovations that kept the Republic stable for 8 centuries have become the foundation for modern democratic institutions, corporate management structures, and international diplomatic protocols. The Venetian separation of ceremonial authority from actual decision-making power shows up in modern constitutional monarchies and corporate board structures. Their system of checks and balances influenced the American founding fathers' approach to preventing the concentration of power in individual leaders. Their diplomatic emphasis on flexible alliances and commercial partnerships became the template for modern international relations. The intelligence networks that once tracked Mediterranean trade routes evolved into the kind of comprehensive information systems that modern governments and multinational corporations take for granted. The Venetian understanding that information is more valuable than physical assets anticipated the knowledge economy by 500 years. Even their approach to crisis management, turning threats into opportunities through strategic positioning and alliance building, has become standard practice in business schools and diplomatic academies. Looking at Venice today, you're not just seeing a tourist destination built around historical nostalgia. you're seeing a proof of concept for institutional survival in an age of permanent disruption. Every challenge that Venice faced, technological change, military threats, economic upheaval, political transformation, has modern equivalents that contemporary organizations struggle to manage. The Venetian solution was always the same: maintain your core competencies while continuously adapting your methods of applying them. Preserve your institutional memory while remaining open to new possibilities. Build systems that are robust enough to survive unexpected shocks, but flexible enough to take advantage of unexpected opportunities. It's a survival code that works for individuals, organizations, and entire civilizations. The tourists photographing themselves in gondolas don't realize they're documenting the success of history's most sophisticated adaptation strategy. The city they're visiting isn't just a preserved medieval environment. It's a working demonstration of how intelligent systems respond to existential challenges by becoming something new while remaining essentially themselves. Venice survived for 1,000 years, not because they were the strongest or the largest or the most militarily powerful, but because they were the most adaptable. They understood that survival isn't about avoiding change. It's about controlling the terms of your own transformation. And in a world where the only constant is disruption, that might be the most valuable lesson of all. Standing here at the end of Venice's 1,000-year journey, you realize that this story was never really about a single city-state in the Mediterranean. It was about the eternal human challenge of building something permanent in a world of constant change, and discovering that the secret isn't to resist change, but to become so good at adapting that change becomes your competitive advantage. Venice's survival code reads like a handbook for navigating the modern world. Embrace your geographic and cultural advantages, but don't become dependent on them. Build systems that can evolve without losing their essential character. Treat every crisis as intelligence about future opportunities. And most importantly, remember that the institutions and relationships that survive disruption are those that remain useful to the people they serve. The refugees who fled to those malarial swamps in 421 AD couldn't have imagined that they were creating a template for organizational resilience that would still be relevant 16 centuries later. But perhaps that's exactly why it worked. They weren't trying to build a monument to their own importance. They were just trying to survive long enough to see tomorrow, and they did it so well that tomorrow kept coming for 1,000 years. In our age of technological disruption, political upheaval, and climate change, Venice's story offers something more valuable than historical knowledge. It offers hope. If a group of medieval refugees could turn a swamp into an empire, if they could survive everything from plague to cannons to Napoleon, if they could transform decline into a new form of success, then perhaps the challenges that seem insurmountable today are really just opportunities we haven't learned to recognize yet. The water is still rising in Venice, just as it always has, but the city endures and adapts and continues to teach the same lesson it's been teaching for a millennium. Survival isn't about being unchanging. It's about being unchangeable in your commitment to change intelligently. As you watch the sun set over the Grand Canal, painting the ancient palazzos in golden light that hasn't changed since the Doges ruled an empire, you understand that you've just witnessed something more than history. You've seen a masterclass in the art of becoming eternal by embracing the temporary, of achieving immortality through the willingness to die and be reborn as many times as necessary. It's a lesson worth remembering, because the water is rising everywhere, and we're all Venetians now.